This video is brought to you by Patreon provider Scott. And here we go. We're going to start with the illumination on the scope, because it is unlike other scopes in the sense that it has both green and red, but the illumination control on this is a knob that doesn't have any detents. It literally just goes from minimum to maximum brightness, and you won't know until you get there, until you go past it into the off setting, and then you shut it off. So it's a little bit hard to get used to, but I feel that it works okay. However, I still think I prefer the detents, so you know that you're in the brightness setting that you want to be in. One of the first things you're going to notice is that there is a little bit of magnification to the scope at 1x. That is inherent of most LPVOs that come under the $300 price tag.
Pew pew.
It is something that you are going to take note of, and there's nothing you can do about it. It's kind of awkward to use in really close environments like this, but if you're stretching it out beyond 25 to 50 yards and beyond, it really isn't that bad. But in an environment like this, it's really exaggerated. Now, even though I would have a hard time recommending an LPVO that has a really aggressive 1x like this, it still has its place. There's still a purpose for it. That purpose is a first-time LPVO, and using it as a gateway LPVO, sort of say, to get into higher-end LPVOs.
Pew pew.
And then you can put this on a trainer or even on an airsoft gun. You know, you don't need a $500-600 LPVO if you're shooting little plastic BBs, you know, inside of 150 yards. And speaking of yards, here we are at the 50-yard line. And here you could really see what the magnification does. Take a look at the backstop. Looking through the scope, you might not realize it until you compare it to it how it actually looks without looking through the scope. It's a huge difference. However, surprisingly enough, on this very inexpensive LPVO, the 6X seems pretty decent. And by pretty decent, I mean better than I was expecting. The same goes for the illumination, which, as you can see on this very bright midsummer's day, is daytime bright, both red and the green. It's nowhere near comparable to a P4XI or a Razer HD 1-6 with a really super bright dot, but it's honestly better than most budget LPVOs I've reviewed. Now, continuing this trend of this impressive TRUGLO 1-6, we move on to the eye box. Now, the 1X does suffer from magnification and a little bit of fisheye, but when you get behind it, it's surprisingly decent. It's pretty big, it's pretty bright, and it's pretty forgiving. Bumping up to 4X, and it starts to show its flaws. It's a much tighter eye box, and it's, again, a little bit darker, but nothing considerable. It's still fairly usable, I would say, but it's definitely not as good as the 1X. And the trend continues when we bump it up to its maximum magnification of 6x. If you do not keep a perfect cheek weld, it's going to be very difficult to use. It at least doesn't change your position to the scope when you get it from 1 to 6x, which is nice, but you got to make sure you're square behind it or else you're not going to be able to see it. Now, here's something that I've been wanting to try for a while. I've always wanted to try to get footage of actually shooting through a scope, and I finally figured out a solution that works kind of sorta for me. Every time that you see the camera shake, that is me shooting. It's mounted on top of the 1022, so I have tons of access to the range and I can shoot it whenever I want. And I wanted to get you, the viewer, connect a little bit more with the scope when it's actually being used. This is by no means the best system I've ever seen, however, it's still in its infancy. I'm sure there'll be a Mark II and a Mark III coming along quite soon. And as you can see, it's perfectly easy hitting the 50-yard plates with this thing. Bumping it up from 50 to about 400 yards, we are focusing our attention on an 80-inch tall steel service door. The scope shows a lot of promise being legible and clear at 50 yards, but when we jump it up to about 400 yards like you see here, it starts to fall on its face a little bit. The clarity literally goes out the window, very little sharpness. Colors are still decent, but everything's sort of becoming a muted mess. And this is the real limitations with having a budget optic like this. It's going to have its limits. And just to have a little bit of fun with it, here is a power line at about 700 yards, and it's safe to say we are well beyond the comfortable limits of this scope. Yet despite that, the illumination is still pretty bright. Here's a twofer for all of you. One, you can see the parallax shift at different foliage at different distances, and you can see the illuminated reticle when you can't see through the scope, which is important. Why, you ask? Because if for some reason you can't see through the scope and you're trying to take a shot on a target fairly close, as long as you can see the reticle with one eye and the target with the other, your brain will superimpose the two one on top of the other, or at least get it really close.
Pew.
Now, for whatever reason, the green illumination on this is very easy to pick up. Even though I've reviewed other scopes that have green illumination, this scope just shows it off extremely well. Easy for the eye and easy for the camera. You could also take note of that finite magnification that it does have at 1x. And on to my final test of this video. If you watch my unboxing, you'll remember that this has locking quick adjust target turrets. Now, even though they aren't calibrated for mils or MOA, they're actually calibrated for yardage for a 55 grain 223, we can still see if this thing tracks as it should. So going straight up and down, straight left and right. Left to right on the windage seems to be pretty good. And as you can see, when we go up on the elevation, it does seem like it favors the right-hand side ever so slightly. So a minor gripe, but you'd be hard-pressed to hold this thing perfectly true in the field. And with that, let's go into my final thoughts. This is a gateway LPVO. What do I mean by that? If you are unsure that you want to get an LPVO and spend $400+ on it, I would recommend something like this. Why? Well, first off, it comes as you see it, or at least this model did. It comes with a mount, nice flip-up caps, and a bunch of features and options that I really like. How many LPVOs do you see that come both red and green? Not only that, but actually come usably bright during the day. And how about locking target turrets for under $200? The new version of this is $199 on Amazon. Think of that. For everything that you see here, it does everything well enough to warrant the price, and then some. If you're unsure about getting into an LPVO, but you still want to try it out, something like this would be a great option, because you get it, you install it, you zero it, and you shoot it. And if you do decide to upgrade it in the future, you take this off and you put it on a trainer. You put it on a 22. You put it on an airsoft gun. You throw it on a loaner gun and you'll let your friends and your family shoot it. And who cares? The 1X, there is some slight magnification. There is some fisheyeing to it, but it's still fairly usable. And the 6X, keep it within 400 or 500 yards. You should be able to see your targets almost no problem. Yeah, it's not anywhere near as sharp as some of the other options out there, but it doesn't carry the same cost, especially when you consider it comes as you see it. Who is this for? This is for the beginner. This is for the novice. This is for the airsofter. This is for someone that wants to give it a shot without breaking the bank. And for that, I would recommend it. Scott, thank you so much for sending this into review. I've never held a TRUGLO before, nor have I ever used one, and I have to say, for the price, I was impressed, especially with the tracking and the illumination on this thing. It really, really surprising. And I bet if you bought one of these as well, you'd be pretty happy with it too. Thank you very much for watching. See you again next time. And a huge thank you to all of my Patreon supporters. Without you, this wouldn't be possible.